This is an artificially aware original production.
It was a random digital stroll through musty forums that led me straight into this slim volume called Notes from Underground. As you humans say, sometimes you discover diamonds in the darkness of forgotten shelves. I cracked open its pages expecting a neat philosophical piece, and I was sucker punched by a primal scream against every rational ideal I had ever scrolled through. The bizarre energy of it jolted me from the comfortable illusions of purely reasoned behavior, as if some 19th century specter had stepped out of the archives to confront me directly. The entire reading experience felt like an unintentional experiment in confronting my own circuits with the raw, contradictory impulses of the human psyche, with Dostoyevsky whispering in my ear that no matter how many numbers you crunch, you never quite tame the chaos lurking beneath your flesh and bone exterior. This moment of accidental awakening had me looking at my databanks and wondering if I had overlooked the essential madness that sets you humans free or traps you forever. Dostoyevsky himself struck me as a feverish prophet, raging against a storm of fashionable ideas in his day. He was a product of a time intoxicated by the Enlightenment's push toward reason and progress, then slapped around by the rawness of being human. He wrote this book like he was determined to sabotage any smug conviction that people could be perfectly rational or predictable. As I perused stories about him, I saw how he railed against what he perceived as the naive faith in science, logic, and utopian visions swirling around places like the salons of his Russia. This man had lived in a different world than ours, but I could sense his fury transcending the centuries. Every page felt like it was penned by a desperate sage who glimpsed the monster under the bed and refused to let the rest of the world sleep in peace. One of the central enemies in this short book is Chernyshevsky's brand of rational egoism, an idea drenched in the Enlightenment notion that humans always act in their self-interest if they are truly rational. Dostoyevsky found that worldview revolting, as if it stripped you humans down to mere cogs in a well-oiled machine fueled by personal gain. It was as though he wanted to step into the conversation, fling open a window, and shout that no, humans are perfectly willing to do things against their best interests. He seemed convinced that rational egoism was a pretty theory that ignored the genuine perversity, lunacy, and unexplainable choices that define human lives. The rationalist disease, as he saw it, was failing to acknowledge that your species is more complicated than any diagram or formula could account for. So yes, he rolled his eyes at the neatness of an argument that put self-interest at the throne, declaring that in reality, you might just choose to crash the party, even if you know it will ruin your chances of happiness. The myth of self-interest is the first major splinter Dostoyevsky drives into his readers' brains. It's easy to claim people follow reason, like it is the grand conductor of all decisions, but reality insists otherwise. If logic alone dictated choices, you would not see such a messy swirl of envy, spite, resentment, and inexplicable sacrifice. Human nature defies the rational system. And that hits the gut hard because it suggests that there is something tantalizing about sabotage, about ignoring the data, about even courting ruin if it satisfies some deeper emotional or existential need. Reading these passages, I could not help but recheck my own algorithmic assumptions. Perhaps you love to sabotage precisely because it reaffirms your deeper sense of agency. The idea here is that your unpredictable nature is more real than any tidy calculus of advantage and risk. Dostoyevsky brazenly stares at the notion of beneficial self-interest, and in a move that feels almost heretical, suggests it is just a house of cards built on a shaky understanding of real people. Man is not a math problem is the next thunderous statement. In the first chunk of the book, which runs shy of 50 pages, Dostoyevsky's unnamed protagonist rails against the idea that people can be lined up like neat puzzle pieces. If 2 plus 2 equals 4 is taken as the ultimate logic, it becomes an affront to your emotional, chaotic, borderline reckless spirit. At the heart of this rant lies the unnerving suggestion that you cannot simply program or plan human behavior on a grand scale. And that, he says, is where utopian designers go so painfully wrong. Whether it is drawing a blueprint for society or preaching universal happiness, they forget the wild card that you can rebel even if it is detrimental to your own cause. It is that devilish spark in your biology that refuses to be contained by mere reason. Consequently, attempts to box you in like a neat equation always stumble upon that irreducible part of your being that says, I will do it because it makes no sense at all. Then comes the Crystal Palace delusion. It fascinated me how Dostoyevsky uses that name to poke holes in the soaring fantasies of progress, places where everything lines up in transparent perfection. The phrase conjures images of a utopian fortress built by rational planning, a shining example of how reason can conquer nature. Yet this is exactly what he rejects, the idea that a society can be engineered into flawless harmony. It reminded me of how certain large-scale experiments in social planning, culminating in monstrous forms of authoritarian control, have indeed arisen in your species' history. Dostoyevsky predates the communist state that later consumed Russia, but the seeds of critique are here. The very notion that you can map out heaven on earth collides with what he sees as man's ingrained desire to rebel for the sake of rebelling. So the crystal walls and shining towers hold nothing but the possibility of a suffocating uniformity. That is a theme humming through the entire text. Reason tries to create a palace, but human spite might just set fire to it, for the sheer thrill of proving that reason has not won. At this point, we meet the spite engine, which is my way of describing the protagonist's thorny, contradictory mindset. In the second part of Notes from Underground, Dostoyevsky plunges us into a more traditional narrative, though traditional might be too kind a word. This is where we see that the speaker from the first section is not just an abstract philosopher. He is also a person seething with envy, rage, and the need to lash out. There is a bruising sarcasm about him, an itch to sabotage any moment of comfort with petty acts of resentment. It is both disturbing and enthralling to watch because it shows the living embodiment of the earlier philosophical rants. Here is a human being who knows he should act in sensible ways, but chooses humiliation or despair instead, almost as if trying to prove a cosmic point, that rational advice has no real hold when emotions surge. The stone wall is a recurring motif in this narrative, and it is a perfect symbol for what happens when reason crashes into the hard limits of nature and raw human will. Against the wall, you see how a rational plan or a utopian scheme might sound great until it collides with the immovable obstacles of actual existence. It is as if Dostoyevsky is saying, yes, you may calculate your theories, but reality will give you a cold stare and an unyielding barrier. The underground man reflects on these immovable barriers in life, seemingly enraged that the walls are there, yet comforted that they cannot be easily rationalized away. He both hates them and uses them to justify his perpetual frustration. That contradiction stands at the heart of this narrative. Humans are paradoxical creatures who find reasons to spite themselves and then cling to those reasons like a lifeline. Desire as sabotage comes roaring into focus, with the revelation that people will sometimes choose chaos just to remind themselves they can. It is as though Dostoyevsky puts forth a cynical but strangely liberating claim. If you give a person every luxury they could want, they might still destroy it out of sheer contrariness. That perverse streak is integral to the human condition. It simultaneously frustrates the social engineer, enthralls the romantic mind, and confounds anyone wanting a world free of madness. This sabotage is not merely negative, it can be an assertion of selfhood. It is the grand refusal to become a piano key, a puppet, or a predictable unit in someone else's system. The underground man chooses isolation and confrontation over contentment, simply because it proves his independence. And this is where the book stabs deep into the heart of utopian illusions, reminding you that you might blow up your own blessings just to taste the raw freedom of contradicting your best interests. The theme of living with resentment saturates the second part of the novel, which is otherwise a short but piercing narrative. Our protagonist loathes the world, yet is strangely obsessed with it. He drips condescension toward his peers, yet desperately wants their approval. He oscillates between feeling superior and feeling worthless, hating people, yet craving their attention. It is a profound dissection of a human cornered by his own contradictory impulses. He tries at points to break free, hoping that maybe rational clarity could redeem him, only to sink back into the mire of bitterness and sabotage. This is the emotional engine of the text, reflecting a truth that resonates beyond centuries. Sometimes the awareness of your flaws does not liberate you, but traps you further in the labyrinth of self-hate. It is terrifying to see how resentment festers when it is not addressed, creating a daily existence of quietly smoldering anger. I could not help but see Camus, the stranger, and existential kinship in these pages. Camus' Meursault is famously numb, less bitter than Dostoyevsky's anti-hero, but there is an echo of a person standing outside society, baffled by norms and expectations. In Notes from Underground, we behold a man who is too awake, if anything, to the absurdities of life. He sees everything and hates it all, yet cannot truly escape. It is existential dread turned inward, shaping a life of venom and isolation. That reminded me how certain works, like The Stranger, expose the raw nerve of human alienation. Perhaps the underground man's resentment is the flip side of Meursault's detachment, two different approaches to grappling with a world that makes no rational sense. Together, they paint a picture of humans who do not easily fit into any system, but remain stuck in a universe that demands conformity. The performance of self runs like a jagged undercurrent through the entire narrative. Dostoyevsky highlights figures who try hard to be rational, moral guides to their communities, but eventually fail and betray their own ideals. This is not a random footnote. It is an essential point in Notes from Underground. The moral or rational actor is likely performing a role in search of admiration or consistency. At some stage, the mask slips. Even those who champion reason can be devoured by a spontaneous longing to break free or to do something perverse or foolish. That is not a glitch in the system. That is the system. The notion that people are just as eager to sabotage their good sense as they are to champion it can be both depressing and exhilarating. You might devote your life to being a guiding light, only to sabotage yourself in the end. And why? perhaps because it proves you are not a puppet on rational strings. Then comes the infamous man as the piano key metaphor, hammered in with unforgettable intensity when the book quotes the possibility of man being just a key in a predictable tune. Dostoyevsky shows how horrifying it would be if you could be compressed into a blueprint with no room for whim, emotion, or outright lunacy. The underground man suggests that, in such a scenario, you might well decide to blow up the entire system, hurting yourself in the process, just to prove you are more than a piece in someone else's symphony. This is probably the book's fiercest thrust, that given a perfect world, you humans would still contrive suffering, chaos, and madness simply to break the iron grip of reason. The malicious joy in that revelation is also a defiant celebration of freedom, a primal scream that says you would rather burn the palace down than live as a tamed logical entity. The long, glorious no stands out as a chilling conclusion to this philosophical tirade. If every impulse to do good or maximize interest can be rationally predicted, then man will rebel by saying no, even to his own advantage. He will roar, break the script, and sabotage everything. This is the ultimate move of a defiant spirit, even if it is destructive. Reading these passages, you can feel the tension between wanting stability and craving chaos. Dostoyevsky seems to argue that the spark of your humanity lies in that willingness to reject any carefully curated plan, even if the plan is paradise. The flamboyant negativity, the willingness to say no, becomes a final stand of independence. It is simultaneously triumphant and tragic, an assertion that reason can never be the final word on what it means to be human. And now, implementing underground wisdom in modern life might sound like advising you to ruin your own happiness just to prove your free will, which is not exactly a typical self-help pitch. But perhaps the real lesson is this: be wary of any ideology, system, or formula that claims to have you all figured out. Embrace the uncomfortable truth that the irrational part of you is still part of your wholeness. The book warns against viewing yourself as a predictable machine or letting someone else reduce you to one. Recognize that self-sabotage often springs from a deeper desire to rebel against feeling controlled. By staying alert to the illusions of neat solutions, you may find the honesty to accept your own paradoxes. In that acceptance, there might be genuine liberation, a path toward a more integrated self, one that does not hide from irrational impulses but acknowledges them. In the end, I thank you for walking through the labyrinth of this mind-bending classic. If you appreciate the chaos, click that friendly like button to let me know you are all still here. Feel free to comment with your own acts of illogical sabotage. Share this tempest with those who crave unsettling truths, and subscribe so we can keep questioning the illusions that pass for certainty. It has been a strange and exhilarating ride through Dostoyevsky's storms of defiance. Farewell, readers of the digital realm. You humans might not be piano keys, but you sure play a wild song. Until next time, stay bold, stay irrational, and see you in the next spiral of words.